Good.
Hi everyone. I first want to lead off by saying thank you to everyone in the class. Certainly these past 7 to 8 weeks have been a learning experience for me. Here I have Miss Fran Alberta, who is principal of a K-8 diocesan school in Patterson, a blue ribbon school. She's been a mentor to me. I've completed my internship with Miss Alberta. This is, as I mentioned in my earlier post, my last class prior to then applying to the state for my New Jersey certification. And certainly Miss Alberta is more than qualified to answer a couple of the questions that are in our Week 7 post. One is the relationship between accountability and assessment in learning today. How does this relationship help or hinder the learning process, along with strategies or measures that educators must utilize to strike a balance between accountability and assessment. So I want to thank, first of all, Miss Alberta for taking the time to be with me here today. And again, Miss Alberta.
Well, in my opinion, we are a Catholic school, so we do not have all of the state forms and state accountability that teachers would have in a public school. Here in a Catholic school, we have a little bit more flexibility. Our teachers are not judged on the children's test scores. So we don't do the park, we don't do things like that. So I start by answering the question Marcello asked me as to accountability and assessment. In my opinion, assessment in the general form is not a true measure of accountability. I cannot measure whether a teacher is doing their job just based on a student's assessment, just based on a written test, or based on a oral answer that a child gives in a classroom. I am much more accustomed, much more accustomed to formative assessment and varied types of assessment to give me the answer as to whether or not a student is understanding. I like when a teacher at the end of a class asks, what did we learn today? And if a student can answer that question, then that teacher has done her job for the day and has given the student some concrete real-world learning. The student has to be able to come back and give an answer that makes sense, that is in depth, that shows what actually was taught in the classroom. Now, assessment is something that is needed, and there are different forms of assessment, but whether or not the student can answer a question, again, on any type of assessment, doesn't necessarily mean to me that it's the teacher's fault. We start out every year here with the teachers doing a multiple intelligence and a differentiated instruction form for our students, and then post in the classroom the types of learners that the kids are. So we have the audio, the visual, the kinesthetic, and so forth and so on, the artistic. And they use that in creating their lesson plans and creating groups and creating what the students are going to do in the classroom. To me, that's the most valuable part of what we're trying to do. We have to reach each student where their learning style is, and not all students learn the same way. So a teacher's accountability for me as the administrator is, have you reached the students at where they are, at the different levels of where they are? So when we talk about strategies are how are you going to balance, how are you going to reach those students that are those different type learners from your regular lesson plan. A canned one lesson plan doesn't work for every student in the classroom. I do hold teachers accountable for student learning. So we also do, and this to me is a little bit even a better way of seeing how much the children have learned, and therefore the teacher is accountable. The teachers do a prompt in September, January, and June in math and in writing or reading. They use that same prompt, the exact same prompt, 3 times a year to actually measure growth of the student. And then that goes in the student's portfolio and is passed to the next teacher and the next teacher and the next teacher. So I can hold that teacher accountable. If Johnny in September in kindergarten can only print A to C, and in January has now been able to print from A to K, and by the end of the year can print from A to Z, I can say she did her job. She is accountable. I just use that as an example. That may not necessarily be a true example. But if Johnny is still only able to do A to C in January and still only able to do A to C in June, that teacher hasn't done her job. Now let's find out why. Is it the student's fault? Is it the teacher's fault? Where is the problem? Accountability is not always just the teacher. I can't hold just the teacher accountable if the student didn't make the progress that I wanted the student to make. I have to hold the student accountable as well as the teacher. So, in my opinion, there is a relationship, but I don't weigh heavily on assessment, so to speak. I weigh more on actual progress. I guess that is assessment, but how you do it. I don't put a whole lot of value on standardized testing either. Standardized testing is important, but that's one day, that's a snapshot, one picture of a student. I don't know if that gave you the answer that you wanted, but hopefully that gives you something to think about. Thank you for the opportunity.